Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. Story number 1. This was a normal rainy evening when I was 14. I played games until my mom came home and told me to go to sleep. Our house is located on the top of a hill. Our closest neighbors are 100 meters farther at the road. The road leads to nowhere, so there's rarely people going past our home. Behind the house is a little forest area where I used to play as a child. Also, our house has 2 floors. My room is at the second upper floor. Our house is on a lonely stretch of land. All this rain and darkness and forest do tend to creep me out sometimes. On to the story. I went to bed as usual at 11 p.m. I fell asleep very quickly. At 3 a.m. I woke up and went to the bathroom. As I was using the bathroom, I looked through the window as I did my thing. But it wasn't that relaxing nightly forest that I was used to seeing. My eyes glued to a specific character in the darkness. A man wearing dark clothes was just standing at the path to the forest. I didn't know what he was doing. I started to panic, of course, and switched off the bathroom light. I sneaked to my parents' room that was downstairs. I had never in my life felt so afraid moving in my own home. We had alarms, but that really didn't make any difference to calm me down. I took a look at my parents, and they were both asleep. My sister hadn't woken up either. I went to the kitchen and peeked through the window. There he was, still standing at the pathway. I now clearly could see his whole body. He was a normal-sized man. I couldn't figure out his face, though. I just sat at the window scared and almost falling to tears. I peeked through the window again, and this time the man was standing in our yard. Now I could easily see his face. He looked like a normal man, but he appeared to be high on drugs. I ran to my parents' room to wake them up. My father ran to the back door, but my mom said that he could be dangerous and might be armed. She called the police. Movement inside the house made this guy move. He started to run towards the road. My father just sweared when he couldn't go after him. Now we just waited for the cops to show up. Even my heavy sleeper sister woke up. Eventually the police showed up and they asked questions and inspected our yard, as well as the forest with my father. At this point I went to sleep again with a little help by my mom, since I was pretty shaken up. But I was too tired to fall asleep. Next day we got a call from the police. That man was on drugs and the cops said he was harmless. They advised us to call them again if we saw him one more time. We happily didn't. I still live in the same place few years later, and this night still gives me nightmares. Story number 2. This literally just happened, and I'm shaking and a bit upset. A bit of background. I live in a neighborhood that is infamous for its high crime rate and the amount of drug users that live here. But the rent is cheap, so what can you do? Anyways, I was walking our dogs, already heading back home. We were climbing a steep road that led to a bigger road, and on both of the sides of the steep road were chain-link fences. Behind them on both sides a construction site. Lots of spruce and pine trees, so it was a bit shadier. As we were walking up the road, I hear voices about 200 meters. That's a little over 200 yards behind me. I glance backwards, as I don't like bumping into people during night, as it's almost 2 a.m. right here, right now. I see 2 dark figures, both male, judging by their voices. They're not on the road, but hiding in the thick bushes, which grow along this road. They have flashlights. I can see 2 beams of light scanning the trees and the road. It's not that dark, so it seems a bit odd. I brush it off, maybe they dropped their keys or whatever. And then I hear the other one say, "Where did that bitch go?" My blood freezes. The guy sounds absolutely furious. Then he continues, "It's your fault." Apparently he says that to the other man, The other guy responds with, "That's not what we should be focusing on. We need to find her." He sounds equally pissed, a bit anxious and rushed. They're not speaking loudly, but loud enough that I can hear them. I pick up the pace and usher our dogs to walk faster. They're adamant on going straight home. They can feel my fear. While we reach the end of the road, we turn right and I look towards the place I saw the men. Nothing. Complete stillness. I head home, and as I'm trying to open the door which leads to the apartment complex I live in with my wife, I hear a scream. It pierces the night and I can see people on their balconies. They stop what they're doing, and they turn their heads, trying to figure out where the scream came from. I rush home, noping out of the situation. When I get home, I kill all of the lights. My wife is working graveyard shift, so I'm alone with our dogs. I haven't heard anything in a while, and as I'm typing this, I hope that they don't find the girl or woman they were talking about. I hope she's all right. So 2 guys with flashlights hiding in the bushes. Let's not meet. Story number 3. This was only a short encounter, but still somehow one of the scariest things that ever happened to me. A few months ago, I was at home around midday, and I heard a knock at the door, so I went downstairs to answer it. I opened the door and was greeted by a short man I'd never seen before. His appearance was fairly unremarkable. Thick stubble, mustache, short hair, but he had the creepiest eyes I'd ever seen. They were wide and unblinking, just staring at my soul. The man asked me in a slow, trance-like voice if I had any bolt cutters he could borrow. Bear in mind, I knew my neighbors, and he was not one of them. I immediately felt alarm bells go off. I told him we didn't have any. He asked if I knew anyone around the neighborhood who might have some. Again, I answered no. I just wanted to get rid of him at this point. He paused for a second, still staring at me, and then said, "Okay," in the same spooky tone, and smiled at me for a solid 5 seconds. His teeth were the color of old bananas, just completely rotten and jagged and furry looking. I felt completely petrified, as if he was going to attack me or something. Then he turned around slowly and walked away. I quickly bolted the door and ran upstairs to see if I could spot him knocking on any more doors, or perhaps creeping around the house, or something, but he had disappeared. I haven't seen him since then, but it was still one of the creepiest encounters I've ever had. Story number 4. This happened approximately 2 years ago in Arizona. I was 27 and my boyfriend at the time was 28. It was 3 a.m. in the morning, and I was woken up by the front door jiggling. At first I thought it might have been our neighbors. The walls were really thin. If they slammed the door, it sounded like it was my door, so I thought nothing of it. It happens again, and I try to mention it to my significant other, and he pretty much said it must be nothing. Go back to sleep. So I'm just laying in bed while the door keeps jiggling. The 3rd time, my cat even ran to the door and growled. So I woke him up again, and he finally gets up. He goes to the door and there's a man standing there, hoodie raised up. He can't make out a face because it's so dark and my light didn't work. Eventually my significant other yelled something, and to this day, I still hate him. He opened the door and actually pushed me outside the door to check it out. Thankfully, the guy already took off. I only think he took off because he heard a man in there. I believe I know he had to have been watching me when I was coming and going. Normally around that time I would be getting ready for work by myself. Story number 5. When I was around 10, I loved playing in the foyer of my house. One Friday or Saturday night, I stayed up late and decided to sit with my back resting against the front door of the house. I really don't remember what I was doing, but suddenly I felt a heavy knock at the door that traveled through the door into my back. Now, at my house, we have a small rectangular glass window right next to the door to see who's at the door. And to cover this window of anxiety is a piece of paper taped over the window. Going back to the story, as I still sit on the floor with my back to the door, dumbfounded, I look up to my right where there's a gap in the paper and the glass window to see the silhouette of a man in glasses looking down through the window, right at me. He speaks and I can hear him muffled, "Can you open the door for me?" As I study the look of the man through the window, I automatically think it's my uncle because they both have bald heads. "Uncle?" I asked. He didn't reply, and I just jumped to my feet and proceeded to peel back the paper from the window to get a better look at this man. He wore a white sweater, was bald, and from the orange-tinted streetlight, I saw that he also wore frameless glasses. When he saw my face, he says, "Hey, how are you doing? Can you open the door for me?" I violently shook my head no and pressed my back against the door, hoping that he wouldn't see me after I retaped the paper to the window. Then there was a pause. I didn't hear a shift in movement or anything. I was just about to stop pressing my back from the wall when suddenly he pounds on the door yelling, "Open the door right now!" I swear I nearly shit my pants, because being the only one awake and 10 years old, I didn't have any other bright ideas besides pressing my back against the door and waiting for this hellish situation to pass by. The pounding and yelling didn't last for a minute, and when it did, I ran down to the living room to wake my dad up sleeping on the couch. I also remember looking at the digital clock we had and saw that the time was 11:49 p.m. My dad got up, walked to the door, opened it, and stuck his head out to find no one there. I never played in the foyer again, and I'm also still wondering who the hell was at my door. Story number 6. The summer after my friends and I graduated high school, we decided to shell out a bit of money, and instead of just camping at the nearby lake like we always did, we decided to rent out the beautiful old log cabin that overlooked the awesome scenery for a few days. It had a wraparound porch and no electricity, and an outhouse to give you some idea of how it really wasn't a place of luxury. There was a campground up the road about a half mile, but other than that, the lake was 20 miles from the nearest town. Our second night at the cabin was a full moon, and our kayaks and canoe were calling to be used. My friend Mike had just purchased a newborn puppy and didn't want him out on the lake in the dark, and he didn't want to leave him alone in the cabin, so he opted to stay in the cabin alone while the 7 of us went out on the lake. We went for a great paddle out to the middle of the lake. It was so quiet and serene that you could hear us laughing and cheering from the shore at any point. When we got back, however, Mike seemed a bit timid to open the door. When we asked why, he explained eagerly. It started when the doorknob to the front door jiggled, but didn't open. Mike, thinking it was one of our parents stopping by to check in, didn't think much of it. He then heard footsteps make their way to the wraparound porch, slowly making their way from the kitchen screen door, which was also locked, around to the front room. Mike hid underneath one of the camp tables with his dog and spotted a rough-looking man in his 40s in the large bay windows overlooking the lake. The man was swaying to the left and right and attempting to open any of the doors available to him, and there were many. Apparently, when we began laughing out on the lake, the man turned suddenly to face the water and began waving his fist and grumbling. Then he started howling, repeatedly. Mike was paralyzed in his hiding spot and watched as our howling visitor made one last poor attempt to get into the cabin and swayed off into the night. Needless to say, none of us slept very well that night, listening for hidden intruders. Story number 7. This happened 4.5 or 5 years ago. My ex-wife and I were living in a garden apartment at the time. It was one of those post-war 2-story types that seemed to be everywhere. Our particular apartment was about 3/4 of the way down our particular building from the street that bisected the complex. I should note it was on the ground floor with just the front door between us and the outside world. I should also note that where we lived was about a half mile from a bad neighborhood in a very bad smaller city. Our neighborhood was relatively safe by comparison. I was home alone this particular night. My ex was away for a few days with her mother, so I was up late playing Xbox. I can't remember what time it was, but it was late, between 3 and 5 a.m. As I'm sitting there, there's a loud knock at the door, about 2 or 3 to be exact. I immediately pause my game and sit up thinking, what the fuck? In my overtired mind, I rationalize it as someone trying to find another apartment and simply making a mistake, or perhaps my brother-in-law needed to stop by to pick something up. I honestly wasn't nervous or afraid, just puzzled. However, I think my subconscious somehow kept me glued to the seat. I did not move or make a sound. I just sat there listening and waiting. When no further knocks came and no one rang the bell or called out, I thought nothing else of it. I sent my wife a text message to something to the effect of, "Someone just knocked on the door," and immediately went to bed. Around 7:30 or 8 in the morning, I'm awoken by the doorbell and a couple of sharp knocks on the door. Without looking at my phone, I go and answer it to find my father-in-law standing there with a grin on his face. All he said was to call my wife's name. "She's worried something happened to you." I asked why, and he just laughed, threw his hands up and said, "I don't know." Now I'm really confused. I run to the bedroom and call her from my cell. She said after I sent the text message to her a few hours prior, she panicked and tried texting me back, but I never answered. So she got scared. I asked what she was talking about. Someone just knocked on our door and left. Then she drops a bomb on me. She tells me that she's heard from a couple of people in the complex that the neighborhood had several home invasions recently, all with the same MO. A knock on the door in the middle of the night. And if someone answered, they were tied up, their place was robbed. There may have been violence involved, but I can't remember now. I thought my heart was going to stop there on the spot. All I could do was assure her I was okay, and that I'd be careful. I had some serious problems sleeping for a few days later. Thankfully, we moved out shortly after. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share. Be sure to leave your notification bells on, that way you're alerted to every new Sinful's Horror video. I hope everyone's week has gone amazing, and I hope you guys have nice sinful plans for Friday and Saturday night. Until we all meet again, stay sinful.